Alright, boys, today I'm going to teach you how to maximize your damage the mathematical ways, right? The mathematical way, the calculus way, the linear algebra way, right? I get this question a lot, right? People always come to me and ask me like, yo, Mr. Labubu. First of all, I'm not a Labubu streamer, but also, people ask me a lot, yo, which bow is better? Is this one better or is this one better, right? Is attack speed better or is boss damage better? And the answer is, it depends. It's different for everyone, different for every class, because the only true way for you to know which one is absolutely better is to use a calculator and plug in all your stats and figure it out. This is because mathematically speaking, it's always going to be different for everyone depending on your stat, right? Depending on the stat you have, the gears is going to perform differently for everyone. Now, why is this the case? Now, this is the thing I do in every single game. I did this in Genshin, I did this in every game. I teach people the same concept, and that is because of damage optimization. This is actually a classic damage optimization problem, and if you have taken, I think this is combinatorics territories, you would know it really well. Basically, imagine this is that imagine you have like some tools, you have like ropes, and your goal is to create the biggest three-dimensional shape, right? So let's say your goal is to create the biggest three-dimensional shapes like this, and you're able to change the parameters of the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. What is the best way to maximize your volumes, which is the damage? It will always be trying to spread your stat out. Your goal should always be make them as equal as possible. Your goal should always be trying to maximize your stat by making all three axes as much as possible. This is because cubic volume is just the biggest. So suppose you have 10 meters of rope and you can allocate to any of the axes, right? The best way to do it will always be divide it evenly into threes. So you put 3 meters here, 3 meters here, 3 meters here. This gives you 3 cubic, which is 27, right? Yeah, 27. This gives you 27 meter cubic volumes of damage. If you instead went ahead and only maximized the one stat, so like let's say you heard like, yo, mastery is really good for wild pack. I heard mastery is really good. So and you only pump into masteries, what's gonna happen is you're gonna have 1 here, and like 8 here, which add up to 10. So 1 plus 1 plus 8 equals 10, right? But then 1 times 1 times 8 equals to 8. And 8 is a lot lower than 27, right? 8 is a lot lower than 27. So from here you can see the way you should allocate your stat dramatically affect your damage. And the best way to allocate your stat is always going to try to spread your stat out evenly. This is the basic logistic of combinatorics. Now, this is not necessarily the case in this game, because when it comes down to playing the game actually, every stat has a different scaling. So like when you look at the game, mastery, for example, scale my damage by 2.75, versatility only like 0.05. So it's not the same exact scalings. And this is where the cost factor come in. So essentially you have to add in the cost factor where instead of having 10 meters of rope, you have $10. Imagine you have $10, right? And if you're trying to buy 1 meter of the x-axis, it'll cost you $1. But if you're trying to buy a meter of the y-axis, it'll instead cost you $2, right? The y-axis is more expensive. Who knows why? It's the game decided like this, right? In this case, you also have to factor in the cost. You can't just spend your $10 evenly, because if you do, what's gonna happen is you're only gonna have like $2 to spread this, while this is gonna be longer. So like, let's say this is $1, this is $2, and you spend $5 on each. You're gonna get 2 meters here, and you're gonna get 4 meters here, like rounding down. This is actually like 5 meters and 2.5. And you can see that this is no longer our goal of making the stat as even as possible. What you should be doing instead is to potentially allocate something like, you want to allocate $6 to here, so you get 3 meters of ropes, and the remaining $4 can go here. They're still not equal, but this is more equal than 5 and 2.5, right? These two numbers are a lot closer in length then 5 and 2.5. So that's what you should be doing. So in this case, you want to allocate $4 to the x-axis and $6 to the y-axis. And this is the basic of combinatorics. You're basically making equations where you're trying to create the biggest three-dimensional shape, right? And you can write this out as a linear algebra equation where you have essentially you want to maximize x times y times z such that, and this is the constraint, this is what we call constraint, such that like x plus y plus z equals 10, and then there's like the money like mx equals to x, m y equals to like 0.5y. So like this is the money factor where m denote the amount of money you have, and c like mc is whatever, right? This is basically the basic of combinatorics, right? So that's what optimization problem look like. So that being said, there are 6 main damage category in this game for you to optimize. You can almost think of this as a 7-dimensional cubes. What you can think of it, instead of trying to make the biggest cubic volumes, now you're trying to make the biggest 7-dimensional shape. I know it's very hard to visualize a 7-dimensional shape, but just think of it as if instead of trying to maximize a cube, you have a shape that have 7 dimensions, and your goal is to try to maximize the 7 dimension, right? They all scale differently, and you can write out these formulas, right? There's 7 different category of damage in this games, and your damage is going to be the multiplicative of all of them. So it's a 7-dimensional shape. It involves something like this, where you have your final damage is attack times grit times elemental being your element. So for example, if you're playing wind knight, you're wind, playing marksman, you're light, times generic damage percent. Generic damage percent are things like range damage, boss damage, multiplied by your skill talents. So your skill talents is going to be the multiplier you see, which is going to be like here, right? These multipliers. So this ratio is a skill talent. There's no way to change it, but it's worth mentioning because of Yaido. And then times M. M is a late game concept that doesn't exist in the game right now until level 100. But I figure it's worth mentioning here just in case. Right. So basically, there are 7 categories of damage. Your goal should be trying to spread out your 7 categories of damage. So coming back to this questions, which bow is better? It's very likely that the attack speed is going to be way better because you already have damage percent, and your goal is to spread out your stats, right? Let's see, a lot of people pick wrong. When this Discord message came out, you can see that people actually were picking the one on the right. You can see people are reacting with the bow on the right, but the bow that's actually is better is going to be the bow on the left because damage percent is already oversaturated where you want to go for attack speed instead. So that's going to be the answer. And it again, like, it depends on your class, it depends on what your build look like, it really depends on how much stat you have. You can check here. When you don't have attack speed, it's better to go for attack speed. When you don't have damage, it's better to go for damage. It's basically the general idea, right? Again, this video or this thing is a rule of thumb to how to spread your stat around. You want to always be building the stat that you have the least dimensional volumes, right? With that being said, what's mean by cost factors, if you guys remember? Basically, some stats are harder to get in the game, and we call them more expensive. A stat that's really easy to get, for example, is generic damage percent, right? Because they appear on your accessories and your talent and your things. So it's very easy to get damage percent because your skills might already have it in. And damage percent are things like literally just like apply 10% more damage like this. Like this is literally a damage percent right here. Like it's built into your kit. This is what we call, it's very cheap to get because they're like everywhere, they're very available. Something that's very expensive to get, for example, would be physical amp, because there's literally no source of amp in the game until you get to level 100 weapon. So that would be something we call very expensive to get because it's very, very, very hard to acquire until you get to like that one specific item, and that's like the chase item you should be eating for. Right? All stats in this game have diminishing returns. So that is another thing you want to be careful of, is that the way stat work in this game is that you have a flat value, right? You have your flat value that can convert into a percentage. So when you build your gear, you can see that they provide flat value, like 100 haze, 100 mastery, and stuff like that. That get added up into a flat value, so in this case, 960, and then they get converted into a percentage. This conversion has a diminishing return on it, and as people have interpolated, that diminishing constant is 4,460 round up. It's about 4,457 without rounding, but it's actually 4,460 if you round up. So your curve actually look like this. This means that the more of the same stat you build, the less return you get, right? So if you build 2,000 of this stat, you get 3,000 of... Look at this graphic example. If you build 2,000 of one stat, you might get 3,000 point of damage as a return. But if you build another 2,000, so going from 2,000 to 4,000, you're only getting less than 2,000 worth of point of damage. So you can see that your first 2,000 stat is worth a lot more than the later 2,000 stat because of diminishing return. So the more you build the same stat, the less it's good. The less good it is. This is another big reason why you want to spread out your stat, because you want to prioritize grabbing the most amount of values in here. It's like, basically think about it this way: when you build a stat for the first time, you get like a 2-for-1 deal, right? If you buy like a cans of Coke for the first time, you get a 2-for-1 deal, so it's more worth it. And then if you buy it again, you don't get a 2-for-1 deal, so like you pay the same price, but you only get 1 can of Coke, so it's less worth it. And you want to maximize your deal as much as possible, which is always going to be starting out. It's gonna be right here. Versatility is the only stat that doesn't follow this formula. Versatility is the only stat that doesn't follow this formula, right? So for example, let's say crit example, right? Your first 1,000 crit give you 23.33%. This chart is from pwyden. Pwyden has a very, very good explanation on damage formula in case you guys need a refresher. The first 1,000 point of crit, when you build it in the game, will provide you 23% crit rate. But your next 1,000 point of crit only gets you to 35. So you can see, like, when you go from 0 to 1,000, you got 23. But going from 1,000 to 2,000, you only got 12 from here to here. And so the more you build, the less crit you get, right? Starting off, you get 22.22% crit per 10 flat crit on the right. However, as you get more into the bottom right, I realize you guys can't see my cursor. Wait, I realize you guys can't see my cursor. How do I show my cursor? Oh, there. When you first build your crit, you're getting 22.22% crit percent per 10. But then when you have a lot of crit, you're getting less and less and less. You're getting all the way to like 0.14%. So the more you build, the worse it gets. This is what diminishing return mean. It means that the more you build, the worse it becomes. But this is not the only factor. This is not the only factor. There's a second, not a real diminishing return, but we like to call it diminishing return. The proper term is more like dilution. Basically, what that means is that other than the fact that the less you get in terms of the in-game values, the less difference it also makes. So it's double whammy, double bad. The more you build on one stat, the twice as bad it is. Because you're suffering diminishing return, and you're also suffering dilution, right? Dilution means that your mileage going from point A to point B is going to be more than point B to point C. So an example would be, if you go from 50% damage to 100% damage, you gain 2 times damage. Going from 50% to 100% is a 2 times, or it's not a real 2 times, but let's say it's 2 times because it's you're increasing your damage percent by 2 times. But going from 100% to 150%, even though in both cases you have increased your damage percent to 50% by 50%, this is only increasing your overall damage percent by 1.5 times because you already have so much. So in both cases, even though you're getting 50% worth of damage, it's actually worth less. It's actually worth less because of dilution, right? The more stat you have, the more you dilute it, and the more you suffer from diminishing return. So it's double bad. So the generic answers is that you always want to spread out all your stat. Always spread out your stat. If you have a lot of damage percent already, always go for attack speed. It will very likely be better, right? But again, like, this is why you need a calculator, because unless you know your stat perfectly, unless you know, like, alright, 30% boss is already good enough, and I don't need more boss, so therefore I should start building attack speed. You're not gonna know what that is. That's good. This bow on the left is significantly better than the bow on the right, by the way. This bow on the left is significantly better than the bow on the right. But unfortunately, people still picked up the bow on the right. Alright, that being said, how do you know which stat is expensive and a stat is cheap? Here is basically from my experience of the game, and this is just come down to knowing the game and the experience, because the game kind of tell you the stat differently. Starting off, we have attack. Attack is a good stat. Attack is always good. You can't ever go wrong with attack. Attack is one of the most rare, in other words, expensive stat. It's very hard to find attack. It's not very hard to find, but it's more rare. This is the biggest reason why Wuku Scout is so broken. It's because it gives you a bunch of attack, and there's no other good ways to find attack. Other ways to find attack would be purple lines on here. Maybe later you can have more stuff. Also, your main stat give you attack, but that's more like a base attack. Attack percent is a more rare stat. It's harder to find than damage percent. As a result, almost always, it's not necessarily true, but let's just say, like, again, like, we make this simple. Almost all the time, depending on your class, again, depending on the way you build, attack is more preferred to damage. If you ever have to compare purple line, usually attack is better than damage. I don't know every class well enough to say if this is true for every other class, but I'm almost certain this is true for every class out there. If not, at best they're equal. Attack is always either as good or better than damage percent. If you're really lost, if you're really confused, the pwyden guy has done a lot of research to figure these out value as well. You can see, for example, magic attack is always better than range damage percent or damage percent boss. Again, like, when I say, like, things like always, it's like a rule of thumbs. Like, unless you plug everything into a calculator, you won't know for sure. But if you have to ask me, is attack better or is range percent better, I'll always tell you that attack is better. Or attack speed better than melee. In this case, for class like Yado, attack speed better. But you can see, like, attack is as good as damage. For Moonstrike, I think it's probably attack speed as well. Attack speed is better than damage. Those are specific cases. For Wind Knight, I'll be very surprised if attack is not better. Yeah, attack speed equals to attack plus melee. So attack is always as good or better than damage percent is what I would say as a general rule of thumb. But again, like, unless you plug everything into a calculator, it's hard to be sure, right? And the entire reason is literally just because attack is more expensive to find. It's harder to find than damage percent, right? Attack is unfortunately affected by enemy defense, and you can kind of think of enemy defense as like a negative attack percentage. And so, but the only way for you to overcome that is to get either more attack or ignore enemy defense. So ignore enemy defense or enemy defense down is another really good stat to have, because you can almost think of it as attack buff. This is one of the reasons why Wild Pack scales so strong with attack. It's because Wild Pack has a ignore enemy defense buff here, right? So your attack percent just get more values. So if you're ever wondering, is attack percent better than damage percent on Wild Pack? The answer is absolutely always. Right. But again, like, it depends on your class, depends on your build. I can't speak for every class and every build, but I would generally say attack is better than damage percent. Right. Moving on, we have elemental damage percent and skill percent and versatility. These are what I like to call one-off. I say one-off because there isn't really like a source of them. There are only really like a couple sources of them. So like there's like one way to build it, and you should always build it if you can, up to like too much. Again, like your goal is to spread out your stats, so like it's not you always build it, but if you can, usually it's a pretty good idea. Mastery is one of the main source for elemental damage for a lot of class. It's why wolfbow doesn't scale that well, because wolfbow lack elemental damage, while other class like frost mage and wind knight can get elemental damage from mastery. So mastery is usually a stat that are pretty good to build on those class. Elemental damage mostly just come from masteries, but there's also the elemental potion, which is why this is really good. The elemental potion is really good because it is another way to increase your elemental damage. And it's the reason why if you play wild pack, getting the boar increases damage so much, because the boar increases your elemental damage by 50%, while the eagle only increases your haste. So elemental damage is another very, very hard to find category. It only really comes from like mastery and other things. I think elemental damage in general is a really, really good stat to have, but you can't really find it. So it only really comes from mastery scaling if your class has it. The same go with skill percent damage. The skill percent damage is obviously fixed at the current moment, other than mastery on the idol, because mastery for some reason like building mastery on the idol literally increases the final damage multiplier on your talent. But that's just basically saying the percent here. Now the thing with skill percent is that there is a stat that affected, and that's going to be attack speed. The more you can attack, the more times you can use your skills, and as a result that directly increment your skill damage. You can almost think of it this way. It's like if you cast your skills once, you're doing 1x skill damage, right? If you cast your skill once, you're doing 1x skill damage. If you cast your skill twice, you're doing 2x skill damage. And if you cast your skill 3 times, you're doing 3x skill damage. So this is attack speed is really good to have up until a point. The problem with attack speed is that you also suffer from other things like cooldown. Like just because you can attack really fast doesn't mean your cooldown is gonna come off. Like it doesn't matter how fast you can attack on the wild pack when you suffer by cooldown. Like yeah, I can attack really fast on my arrow range, but I'm gonna be limited by the cooldown anyway. So as a result, attack speed is really good on skills without long cooldown that allow you to bypass it. But that's not true for fast with long cooldowns. So something to be careful of. I would say if you ask me for a rule of thumb, attack speed is good to have for until a point. You want to have enough attack speed so that you can spam fast enough to get more damage off while you can, but not so fast to the point where you just dish out all your attack and then you have no cooldown left, right? This is one of the most class dependent stat. I think at the current moment, attack speed is really, really good when you're really low on attack speed. But attack speed after maybe like 30 to 40%, you have enough attack speed, and at that point attack speed become like not very good. It's kind of like a break point. It's like going from 1 attack to 2 attack is pretty good, and then going from 2 attack to 3 attack is less good. Going from 3 attack to 4 attack is less good because of what we talked about before, like the Wayne math workout. But also it gets harder and harder to go to more attack, because let's say you have a buff skills that's this long, right? And a lot of classes have buff skills. Let's say you have your buff skill that's this long, and you can do 10 attack in between. In order for your attack speed to actually matter, you have to build enough to get this to 11 attack to fit in here for it to actually make a difference. Just because you're building attack speed doesn't mean you're gonna see benefit from it. It's a problem of this, which is why attack speed is what I like to call a breakpoint stat, where you want to aim for certain threshold of attack speed, like 20%, 30%, 40%. I would say like probably 30% is fine for most of the class, and then you want to stop. Right. And then we have versatility. Versatility pretty much work the same way as kind of like elemental, like where you the versatility gives you like a separate damage multiplier, and it's really good to have. Or it's really good to have because there's no source of versatility damage other than versatility. You pretty much always want some versatility after building on other stats, just because, like, again, you want to spread your stat out. So like once you're done building your other stat, like, you know, your damage, your generic damage, your attack, versatility usually is the stat you look for. So it's in the way you can kind of call it the end game stat, where like once you're done building everything else, the versatility is the stat you want to start looking at. Versatility has a lot lower diminishing return for some reason, so you don't have to build a lot. You don't have to build a little bit for it to be really good. Instead of a constant being 4,000, it has a constant of around 2,000 ish. So it's like about half. So if I were to illustrate this on a graph, it looks something like this, where you have your versatility scaling and you have a traditional scaling, which is the blue one. The blue one is your other stat scaling, and the red one is the versatility scaling. You can see that versatility, you get a lot more benefit for having less of it. So you don't have to build too much versatility. Like, you can just get it to, like, you can just get a little bit of it and you get majority of your benefit. So it's like the end of stat you splash on. Like, you want to focus building on other stuff, of course, but versatility is a good stat to have a little bit always. Cool. Let's move on to the next one. Generic damage percent. Generic damage percent is the worst one to get usually, because it's the most available one. It's the easiest one to find. It's the cheapest one. To give an example, if you guys know how, like, when you parties, you guys know how when you make a party with a tank and a healer, you get a power of will buff, right? They give you 25% damage. That is actually a generic damage buff. It actually fall under the generic damage percent. Basically, anything else I didn't mention that say damage percent on it is a generic damage percent. So range damage, boss damage, damage against elite, they're all considered to be generic damage percent, which is why they're easily available. Because anything that say the word damage and it doesn't have the word like elemental on it is a generic damage percent. Vulnerability doesn't say damage, but it actually falls into generic damage percent. You can almost think of vulnerability as like a party-wise damage buff. So when you see the hive that give 4% damage or 4% vulnerability to your entire party, you can almost think of this as giving your entire party a 4% damage buff, which is actually pretty bad because you already have so much damage buff, and so you suffer from dilution. You don't suffer from diminishing return on these things because it's only when you build a stat itself, but you will suffer from dilution, unfortunately. It's also why the crab is not that good on the wild pack. It's because you suffer from diminishing return and dilution when you build mastery, and damage percent is a very over diluted stats in this game, right? And this is the damage percent because you can see it's a companion damage. So damage percent is a thing I try to avoid unless you like have a calculator calculate it out. I would say damage percent is a stat I would avoid. Again, like, especially when you're comparing scenario where like you're comparing attack to damage percent, attack is either going to be better or damage percent. Attack is either going to be better or as good as damage percent for the most part. So I would just choose attack, and attack speed would be better than the two of them if your class can utilize attack speed properly. Okay. Because of the skill difference scaling. So that's pretty much what it is. Crit. Okay, crit is a stat that is really good on every game, because the reason why crit is a good stat on every game is because they are always programmed as a multiplicative multiplier. Right? Imagine if you have a 100% crit rate and you have a 200% crit damage, you can basically guarantee yourself to crit every hit, and that basically just 2 times your damage because you're critting every time. The crit is a largely available stat that's expensive to build. At least that's what I like to call it. The reason why crit is an available stat that's expensive to build. So in general, I would say crit is also a good stat to build. Even though you have a lot of crit is still a good stat to build because it's very, very expensive and it's very hard to get. It's very hard to get high. The reason why crit is hard to get high is because you have to build 2 stat in order for it to function. You have to build crit rate and crit damage. Now, in this game, you cannot, they don't conflict with each other, right? There are area where you build crit rate and there are area where you build crit damage. They don't conflict with each other. But in general, crit is a stat that you have to build both in order for it to function. So you can't just do one or the other. You have to build both, right? You have to have high crit rate to get the crit damage in. And if you have high crit rate but low crit damage, then it's not that meaningful. If you have high crit damage but low crit rate, it's also not that meaningful because you're not being consistent. So you have to build both, right? So crit is a good start to find because you need a lot of crit in order to be as good as other stats. You need a lot of crit for it to be as good as other stats. It comes down to this. So crit is we have something called crit values. Kind of it's not really a concept that you can easily visualize in this game, but you can think about it this way, where the way crit work is that when, let's say you're attacking, right? Let's say you're attacking and you hit a critical strike. When you hit a critical strike, your damage get multiplied by your crit damage. And if you don't hit the critical strike, you don't get the damage multiplier, so you just times 1. So there's no difference, right? And this happened when you crit. Like if crit. And then this happened if not. You can almost translate this into a mathematical equation where you have your damage D times crit damage if you crit, and then you have D times 1 if not crit. The amount of times you don't crit is a reciprocation of the amount of times you crit. So this has just become 1 minus crit, right? And if you do this to calculate expected values, your overall damage is basically going to look something like this, where you have D times crit damage times your crit rate plus D times 1 times 1 minus crit rate for accounting when you don't crit, right? From here on, you can this is like basic math, but here on you can factor out the D. Okay, that's not kind of wrong, but you can factor out the D, so you get D times crit damage times crit rate plus 1 times plus 1 minus crit rate. And here you can expand. So here you can expand the brackets into crit rate. So this, you can expand this, expand the plus here, right, into crit rate plus crit damage times crit rate plus crit rate minus crit rate 1 plus, like this. You can expand this into this. This come from, wait, let me see. Oh, I'm missing a 1 here. 1 plus crit damage, like this. Okay, but this essentially, okay, whatever, like this expand to crit rate right here. This expand to crit rate plus crit rate times crit damage plus 1 minus crit rate, right? And these two cancel out, so you get crit rate times crit damage plus 1, right? So that's how you get here. So your expected value for crit is gonna be crit rate times crit damage. That's the expected value. And you can see here on, because you have to build, essentially, if you don't understand it, you have to build 2 stat for a crit to function. And so you just naturally have to go more into crit for that reason, because you need 2 stat to function, right? So you just naturally have to go more into crit. And then we have, that's it. So that's the main damage category. Now, if you remember, I still have amp. Amp is not a stat you can find in the game right now. You can find the amp actually in here. I think amp is right here. There's so physical AM and magical AM. AM is a different damage category than damage percent increase. So when you see things like damage, like physical damage increase, is not the same as physical damage AM. And we know this because the level 100 weapon has AM on it, and it's the current only known source of AM. It's the current only known source of AM. So the level 100 weapon will essentially give you a amp multiplier later. Luck is a weird stat because luck follows a similar formula to the rest, but it obviously doesn't have skill percent. Instead it have a luck percent because of the way it works. But luck can actually benefit from the rest of the stat as well. Luck do benefit from crit. You can crit on a lucky strike. You can amplify a lucky strike. You can apply generic damage on a lucky strike. So if you're playing like Frost Mage, the magic damage percent or range damage percent will actually do apply on the lucky strike. So that's another thing. You can almost think of luck like the per skill damage multiplier. So luck is kind of this, which is why luck, if your class somehow is really good with luck, it's actually pretty good in the end, because it's kind of like a skill damage percent multiplier. It's not exact, but I think that's like the easiest way for me to explain and visualize. There's rumors. People are thinking that in season 2, all the luck class. There's a rumor people are thinking that in season 2, all the luck class is going to be way better because there's going to be more stats. There's going to be more stat available in season 2. And so because there's going to be overall more stats, like you're richer, you have more money. You're able to spread out your stat more. And class that scale with luck will have an extra stat for them to spread it out versus class that don't scale with luck. So as a result, people currently think that the luck class will go giga broken on season 2, and that do include smite, dissonance, and wound blade and stuff like that. Just because just because of the fact that you have an entire extra scaling multiplier compared to other class, make it damage better when you have the money to start spending it on it. So those classes are gonna be better and better the more stat you build. Unfortunately, WoW Pack only scale really with mastery and haste. Mastery and versatility. So because you're lacking so much fast scaling multipliers, like you can't build crit, you can't build haste, you can't build luck. It's why the class fall off the fastest. Why this class fall off the fastest? It's because instead of being able to spread out your ass to like different stats, you're so much more limited, and you have to build one-dimensionally, and you suffer as a result. Isn't luck only good if you got a luck conversion stat? Yeah, for the most part, that's the case right now. But some classes have luck conversion. Because other than like if you have a luck conversion, you're basically double dipping. You're double dipping on the fact that you can get a lucky strike, and you are getting your scaling on your talent. That's it. So that's basically it. So like, the next time you have a question, does this answers you guys' questions a little more generically in terms of like, oh, which one should I choose? Should I choose left or right? The answer is almost always going to be choose the one that you have less of. Choose the one that you have less of, right? Again, like, unless you know the perfect scaling for every class and your stat, it's gonna be hard to see. Like, some class benefit from different stat more, right? But I would say there's probably rule of thumbs when it comes down to gear. Like, certain class really like attack speed because they can utilize attack speed really well, which increases the skill damage category. Some class utilize attack really well, so as a result. But I would say damage is probably usually the worst one as a rule of thumb. Attack is pretty good. Elemental damage is pretty good. If you can somehow find a way to increase your attack without the limit of cooldown, it's really good, which is the case of attack speed for certain classes. But versatility is always good to have a little bit because it scales really fast. Crit, if your class is a crit class, you probably want to build a lot into crit just because crit take a lot of scalings. And so some of the some of the more generic rule of thumbs that you can kind of take away from here. This is the same pretty much for every game. Like, every game pretty much come down to this. Every game pretty much come down to this. So, the next time your teacher tell you, like, math's not useful, pull up. The next time your teacher tell you math's not useful, pull up. Alright. Any question? Any question? Any question? No question? If no question, you guys can be... Alright, class dismissed.